Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. As always, we got a great and very timely show for you today. And we have back with a friend of the show, Professor Omer Bartov from Brown University. He is the professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies. And man, it couldn't have been better timing given all the things that are going on in Israel right now and some things you just published. But welcome to the show, Professor.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Well, let me just jump right into it because we got a lot to cover here, and it's a lot of trending things that are happening here. Now, you had a piece very recently in The Guardian that was basically saying that, not basically, a political stalemate led to the Middle East problem, and only a political settlement can truly end it. And man, given the level of destruction that's going on right now and the challenges posed by the two composing camps, that is such a difficult thing to do. But as we're going to get into it here in a second, it's absolutely essential that be done. And in fact, I would even argue that it can only be done that way. As we said many times on our show here, you can't kill your way out of this situation. You can't just kill enough people because, well, for many reasons you can't. But you do have at least a theoretical path to going through, and we're going to show just how difficult it is. Now, first of all, just to kind of lay the scene, so what we get into here of where everybody is on this. First of all, I'm going to show where the United States is on this, and here's just a brief snippet from Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
The way Israel defends itself matters. It's imperative that Israel act in accordance with international humanitarian law and the laws of war, even when confronting a terrorist group that respects neither. In my meetings today with the Prime Minister and senior Israeli officials, I made clear that before Israel resumes major military operations, it must put in place humanitarian civilian protection plans that minimize further casualties of innocent Palestinians. It means avoiding damage to life-critical infrastructure, like hospitals, like power stations, like water facilities. And it means giving civilians who have been displaced to southern Gaza the choice to return to the north as soon as conditions permit.
Now, those words are really, laudatory. You certainly do have to minimize the civilian casualties, and you have to give them a place to live afterwards. But as this report from Doctors Without Borders shows, doesn't look like they're accomplishing that objective very well.
1.8 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are displaced. That's 80% of the population. Many have found shelter inside United Nations schools that are over 4 times their capacity at the moment. But many haven't found space there and instead are staying in tents. And I heard from one colleague this morning who said that there are a large number of Gazans who can't even find a tent, so are sleeping on the pavements and in the roads.
Now, as bad as that is, it's potentially and probably without some kind of external intervention is going to get even worse, as now the Israeli Defense Forces have finished with this first pause and are moving now into the southern part of the Gaza Strip, where the population is now swelled well beyond what's supposed to be the capacity for that area. And we're afraid that, that the physical destruction is going to continue on, and the casualties are going to continue to mount on the Palestinian side. Now, one of the things I found very interesting about your article, Gary, if you can pull up that call out there, is that you wrote that without clearly defined political goals, war tends to devolve into endless destruction and annihilation. I mean, I don't think anyone could argue that that's exactly what's happening right now. The only way out of this conundrum is for Israel to declare that it seeks a peaceful resolution of the conflict with an appropriate and willing Palestinian leadership. Now, that's complicated and problematic for 2 different reasons. First of all, let's look at the Palestinian side, because here's what some of their leadership is saying.
إسرائيل دولة لا مقام لها على أرضنا. إحنا الدولة لابد أن نزيلها، لأنه بالفعل هي تعتبر كارثة أمنية وعسكرية وسياسية للأمة العربية والإسلامية، يجب أن تنتهي. لذلك إحنا لا نخجل من نقول ذلك بكل قوة، إنه إسرائيل لازم نأدبها، وحنأدبها مرة ثانية وثالثة، ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الأقصى أول مرة، لا حتكون ثانية وثالثة ورابعة، لأنه إحنا لدينا إصرار ولدينا قرار ولدينا إمكانيات.
Those comments, I'm just guessing that the Israeli leadership couldn't have been happier that he said those things, because I've seen it repeated ad nauseum by nearly everybody as justification for what they're doing here. Unfortunately, that's not the extent of it, because another Palestinian leader had this to say. Okay, guess we don't have that other clip there, but the other guy was saying, hey, another war could be coming. The help could be coming, implying perhaps that Hezbollah could be coming in.
لو عاد الزمن بكم إلى 6 تشرين بتعملوا 7 تشرين كنتوا 7 أكتوبر.
لماذا يفترض البعض أننا سنتراجع عن دورنا وفعلنا المقاوم؟
ما في ندم يعني.
ندم أننا حطمنا فرقة غزة، فرقة كاملة في جيش الاحتلال.
قلت لي انه في حال الاسرائيليين رجعوا اقدموا على اعتقالات جديده بعد تصفير السجون بتعملوا عمليه ثانيه، يعني يمكن ان تعدوا ب7 اكتوبر جديده؟
انا استطيع ان اعد بمعركه تحرير قادمه وليس فقط 7 اكتوبر.
بالمدى المنظور؟
لا اظن ان ذلك سيكون بعيدا.
So it certainly seems that the Hamas leadership is still completely intimidated, and they're saying, yeah, we don't regret anything, we'll keep doing it, etc. On the other side, you have Benjamin Netanyahu, and in 2015, he had this to say.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu taking his campaign to the Jewish settlement of Har Homa, the heart of right-wing territory. Netanyahu needs them to vote Likud, warning settlers about the dangers of the center-left government led by Isaac Herzog and Zippy Livni.
The truth is simple. If they form the next government, here on these hills, we will have a second Hamas stand. But we prevented it. We develop here great neighborhoods for tens of thousands of Israelis, and we are committed to it.
In an interview later in the day, Netanyahu stated plainly that if he is re-elected, there would be no Palestinian state, a reversal of his support for 2 states, for 2 peoples. It is a significant turnaround, a clear sign that Netanyahu knows he is fighting for his political survival.
Now, we know he won that election and has certainly made good on that promise. And I think you even referred to some of that in your article there. But here, just months before this attack, he showed that his view was even still unchanged.
What are you willing to give? Are you willing to let people in the West Bank vote? Are you willing to let the 300,000 Arabs who have residency in East Jerusalem vote?
Well, I'm certainly willing to have them have all the powers that they need to govern themselves, but none of the powers that can threaten us.
And so subsequent to that, just days ago, or maybe it was even yesterday, Netanyahu says, look, the Oslo Accords were the worst thing that ever happened. We will definitely not repeat that. We will not allow Hamas or the Palestinian Authority to have anything to do with Gaza and operating in the future here. So with such divergent viewpoints of the political leadership of each side that's necessary for a solution, how do you suppose that it's even possible to get to that point?
Well, you're right in saying that the current political leadership, both in Gaza and in Israel, is incapable of any agreement and is unwilling to reach any compromise. And I would say that the leaders of Hamas, who do, as they said already in their charter in 1888, and are saying now what they want to establish is an Islamic Palestinian state with apparently without any Jews in it. And what the people, especially to the right of Netanyahu, the people who form his coalition, the Zionist religious leadership there, are saying that they basically want the entire land of Israel to the Jews and are thinking of how to diminish the numbers of Palestinians there. So with these two leaderships that are quite similar in the general outlook of the future, there cannot be peace, and we are ensuring a continuation of more and more violence, and violence that apparently is getting worse and worse. And we can talk about the details of how this is being carried out right now. The only way that we can get out of this is to change the entire political paradigm. And changing the political paradigm means that first you must replace the leadership of Hamas. Hamas cannot remain the political and military hegemon in Gaza. It has become entirely discredited after October 7th, and they're promising to do it again and again. They're not a partner. And you cannot work with the Netanyahu government that for decades had actually perpetuated this situation of helping Hamas exist there so that it could say, we have nobody to talk with. And now the way they want to use what happened is as an opportunity to entirely eradicate not only Hamas, but actually to remove, it appears, the population, the Palestinian population of Gaza from all or large parts of the Gaza Strip. So you have to change these leaderships. Once you do that, there are in fact ways of beginning a process that could resolve the conflict. And if people reach the conclusion that the 7 million Jews and 7 million Palestinians who exist in this territory between the Jordan and the sea must share that land rather than keep killing each other, then we could move forward. And there are some, I think, pretty interesting ideas as to how to go about doing that.
Now, one of the things that jumped out at me from your article is that you said one of the absolute minimum requirements, or maybe not minimum, but an immovable roadblock that has to be dealt with is the occupation, the Israeli occupation, where you basically said if Israel continues with its occupation, whether that's of the Gaza Strip or the West Bank, then no solution is ever possible, and you'll just get perpetual violence. Do I also recall correctly that shortly before this attack on 10/7, sometime this summer, that you were part of a group that published a letter to the Israeli government where you were recommending some of these changes, really while there was still a chance to do something about it?
Yes, in fact, on August 4th, several colleagues and myself issued a statement called The Elephant in the Room, that received massive support from close to 3,000, mostly scholars, people involved in research on genocide, on the Holocaust, and Jewish history, and many others, as well as political leaders, especially in the United States, but also in Israel, religious leaders, that said, look, the protest against the Netanyahu government at the time was against its attempt to carry out a so-called judicial overhaul, which actually meant weakening the judiciary even further and expanding the powers of the executive even more, under the idea that having done so, this government could continue expansion of the West Bank and bring about its eventual annexation to the state of Israel. And we said, look, the elephant in the room is the occupation. This is why this judicial overhaul is happening. And most of the opposition in Israel, people who were protesting every week against the judicial overhaul, refused to talk about the occupation. They said the occupation, we'll talk about it later, after we resolve this issue. And we said, no, that is the issue. That is the issue.
Yeah.
Elephant in the room. And that's what exploded on October 7th. So without condoning in any way the atrocious attack by Hamas and the killing and rape and really absolutely horrible war crimes and crimes against humanity carried out by Hamas, it could be expected that people that you keep under your boot, that you keep caged for 16 years, as they were in Gaza, that would brutalize the population, then ultimately lead to this kind of explosion. And that cannot be stopped simply by artillery and tanks. It has to be stopped by changing the conditions under which people live. And let me add that this is not only happening in Gaza. While we are talking about Gaza, there is a constant spate of violence in the West Bank where settlers and the military, much of whose people are recruited from among the settlers, are engaged in killing Palestinians, in intimidating Palestinians, and in emptying settlements of Palestinians with an intent to carry out what appears to be an ethnic cleansing of that area too.
Now, just to remind folks here, you actually once served in the IDF, so it's not as though you're against Israel. You're just against policies that actually aren't going to work and is going to keep Israel in perpetual absence of security and peace. Because that's one of the things. Another thing that really stood out to me from the article is that you're seeking a really hard solution but one that is essential to even having a chance at achieving Netanyahu's stated political objective, which is to bring peace to Israel. He's trying to do it by basically just eliminating all of the resistance in there. But look, I know Israel, their senior government officials from Netanyahu on down keep saying, hey, we're having targeted operations here. We're trying to take care of the civilian population. We're trying to protect them. But when if you take the words away and you just look at the actions, it's hard to come to any conclusion other than that they're systematically, intentionally trying to destroy the capacity for the Gaza Strip to even hold human occupation and to have a civil structure, whether it's water, sewage, stores, have jobs, just ability to live. There's this one, Gary, if we can pull that video up that you had earlier, where you see a series of apartment buildings. Now look there, you see a whole series of them. I think there's 7 buildings here. By the time this video clip stops, none of them will be standing. So I don't think that anyone could argue that this is a targeted operation by the Israeli Defense Forces to get a specific enemy in there, but it's just the leveling of the ability for anyone to even live in the area in this place there. And of course, we've seen this throughout. Given this level of physical destruction, is it even possible to even have a political discussion, to have a situation or to seek an outcome that both of the sides, the Palestinians and the Israeli Jews, can coexist in the same place? How can we get there?
Well, look, it's obviously very hard. Let me just say, in response to what you were saying, yes, I served in the Israeli military for 4 years, and I was an officer, a company commander. I care a great deal about Israel. I lived half of my life there. I have family there, and most my best friends live in Israel. So I don't. I'm not anti-Israeli, and I care a great deal about that society. I think it's being led and has been led for a long time down the wrong path. So what I'm trying to think is, how can we change that? How can we make it possible for Israelis to live peacefully in their country? And that is not possible while constantly carrying out violence against Palestinians and occupying millions of Palestinians. And now, how can we get there? Look, the Netanyahu government right now is actually not interested in peace. That's not their goal. And Netanyahu personally would like the war to go on, because as long as the war goes on, he can stay in power. Once the war is over, he will probably be removed simply because he's now the most unpopular man in the country. There is great bitterness about him in the country because of what happened in October. And then he might end in jail.
Yesterday, he's actually still under investigation in a criminal investigation going on that's restarted just a couple of days ago. Isn't that right?
Yes. So first of all, he would be voted out, and secondly, he might go to jail, which is why he wants to stay in power. He's not trusted by the Israeli people either. And you cannot conduct a war with someone in that kind of state of unpopularity and being an indicted official. But
now,
how can we move?
What you mentioned earlier, that basically the Hamas leadership can't be part of this, and the Benjamin Netanyahu led government can't, because they're not even seeking it. To what extent do you think it's even possible that the United States, maybe with Qatar and maybe some others in the region, maybe even with Europe, could collectively come and say, hey, we're going to put pressure on both of y'all? The only way this gets resolved is if Hamas is gone, and ergo the Palestinian people are going to have to create some kind of a new political entity that can even provisionally negotiate on their behalf. And that, I mean, I don't know if it's even possible to say, hey, all right, Tel Aviv, you're going to have to get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't think anyone could do that, but maybe to put pressure on him to step aside, perhaps for someone else who can come in with a clean slate. Is something like that possible?
I think the United States is talking in part exactly about that. They've issued statements just today and yesterday indicating that Israel cannot change the demography of Gaza, that is to push people out, cannot take over the Gaza Strip, and that Hamas cannot remain there. they can't really say to the Israeli public to get rid of Netanyahu. But what they can do, and what they've still not done, is put real pressure on Israel. There may be some pressure behind the scenes that we don't know about, but the real pressure on Israel right now is military and political pressure. It's giving Israel political cover in the UN, and it's supplying Israel with all those multiple rockets that are shooting down rockets from Hamas and from Hezbollah. So the US can put pressure, but ultimately it is Palestinians and Israelis who have to choose a different kind of government, different political leaders, so as to move themselves forward. I think there is a will for that.
What do you think is the possibility within the Israeli society, given the extraordinary anger and angst and insecurity that they've been feeling, not just because of this particular war, but because there have been 4 previous wars and 2 previous with Hezbollah before that. So lots of insecurity, and especially after 10/7, the heightened level of anger that within the Israeli society, they could still somehow find the political will to say, okay, we do want to get rid of Hamas justifiably, but we're going to have to do something different. And we can't just stand by passively as the government, it takes us down a path that can't succeed. I mean, that seems like such a high hurdle for any population to do. Do you see any hope that the Israeli people could do that?
There's hope. There's hope. I would give it a sort of 50-50 chance. There is going to be a political earthquake in Israel. People are really angry at what happened, and they blame the government and they blame the army for having left them in the lurch, which they did. And in fact, I think the army is now trying to show that it can still be effective by all this violence that is now occurring in Gaza. I don't think the military leadership, not the soldiers on the ground, but I think the military leadership will have to go at the end of this. And the political leadership will probably be removed by the end of this. But the question is, where will people go? Will they go right, or will they go left? That is more moderate.
Both are possible, right?
And that's hard to tell. I'm hoping that people will understand that the policy of the last 2 decades, which was to manage the conflict rather than to resolve it, will understand that that is no longer a workable paradigm, that they have to change it, that they have to go back to actually considering the fact that Israeli society is being corrupted and weakened by an ongoing occupation of millions of people, and that the only way to improve their own lives, to help them and Palestinians feel that they're at home in their own country, is to talk with each other and to figure out a way to share that space, rather than to dream of waking up one morning with the other side entirely gone. Yeah. That's not going to happen.
It's just not going to happen, right? As you point out, I think in that article, that it's almost an equal amount of people from the Jordan to the sea of each side, and neither side is going to go away. Before we let you go, I want to ask you, perhaps even related to your comment there about the anger of the Israeli people, what do you make, and what has been the public reaction to this recent letter that's been uncovered, that a year ago that some people in Israel actually knew about a detailed plan, what Hamas was planning to do, and yet took no action of it? How is that playing into all this?
Well, let me tell you something strange. Just as the Israeli public knows very little about what's happening in Gaza and keeps asking, why is it that people are so angry at us? We are just retaliating to an act of terror, because they don't see on their screens the kind of destruction of lives and property in Gaza. So too, there has hardly been any reporting of this in the Israeli media. It's been discussed in the United States, but not very much in the Israeli media. When this comes out, and it is eventually going to be reported, I think it will add to the sense of people that they were betrayed by their own leaders. And they were betrayed by their own leaders because their leaders first took their eyes off the ball. They were involved in their own ideas of this judicial coup and were just not looking. And B, most importantly, because of a sense of overconfidence in Israel, that it didn't need to worry about the Palestinians. Yes, Hamas had plans, but they were incapable of carrying them out. These were aspirations and not actual plans. And this was exactly what happened in October 1973. And 50 years later, the same thing happened. It was a product of arrogance and a sense of euphoria of power. And maybe now people will understand you cannot win this with guns. You have to win it through diplomacy and understanding between the two groups.
Yeah, and as someone, I have fought in several wars and different combat situations, and I have seen it never play out any differently than what you described. And I pray that people figure that out quickly while there's still at least a theoretical chance of reaching a peace, because this could get a whole lot uglier. Professor Bartov, thank you so much for coming on the show again today. And it's been very illuminating. And unfortunately, this issue is going to be around for a while, and we're going to continue to ask you to come and help us make sense of all the things that are going on over there. But we applaud you greatly for your desire to see peace for both the Israelis and the Palestinian side, so that all of the people can actually get back to living a regular life. We thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
And that's all we have for you today. But we actually are going to be back at 3 o'clock with Matthew Ho. We got another live show for you today. So look forward to seeing that, because we're going to cover what the life is actually looking like from the Palestinian perspective, which doesn't get covered very much in the Western media. And we're going to touch on that today. So we're going to remain unintimidated and uncompromised in bringing you the information that you need to make sense of your life. Thank you very much. And we'll see you in a couple of hours.